son of millionaires, hires a poor woman as his assistant. What he discovers on her first day surprises him. Hello and welcome to 80s Love Stories, where I, your favorite narrator, Christopher, bring you an exciting love story straight from the unforgettable 1980s. Get ready for a journey full of nostalgia and incredible twists. Today's story is truly remarkable, with an ending that's sure to touch your heart and leave you amazed. So, stay with me until the very last moment. I hope this experience is unforgettable for you, and may God bless you and your family. Now, let's get started. The chrome-trimmed Cadillac Seville pulled up to Davidson Enterprises, gleaming headquarters in downtown Chicago, its white paint reflecting the morning sun of June 1985. Henry Davidson III stepped out, adjusting his power suit and running a hand through his perfectly styled dark hair. At 28, he was the youngest division head in his family's company, though everyone knew it wasn't due to merit. "Another day of proving I'm not just Daddy's boy," he muttered, striding through the marble lobby where employees scurried out of his way. His father's words from breakfast still rang in his ears. "Time to prove you can handle real responsibility, son. Find yourself an assistant today, and do it without the family name." The elevator carried him to the executive floor where his secretary, Mrs. Peterson, awaited with a stack of resumes. "I've scheduled interviews every half hour, Mr. Davidson. The first candidate arrives in 10 minutes. Henry nodded, scanning the first resume with disinterest. 7 interviews later, he was ready to call it quits. Every candidate had been polished, qualified, and utterly boring, exactly what his father would want. Then Mary Phelps walked in. She wore a second-hand dress that had seen better days, her brown hair pulled back in a simple bun, but it was her eyes that caught Henry's attention, determined, intelligent, and unafraid to meet his gaze. "I know I'm not what you're expecting," she said before he could speak. "I don't have a college degree or executive experience, but I can work harder than anyone you've interviewed today, and I learn fast." Henry raised an eyebrow. "And why should I hire you over candidates with actual qualifications?" "Because I'll tell you the truth, not what you want to hear. Like right now, your tie is crooked, and there's a coffee stain on your sleeve that you tried to hide with your jacket." Henry glanced down, surprised to find she was right on both counts. A smile tugged at his lips despite himself. "That's rather bold of you, Miss Phelps. Poor people can't afford to waste time being subtle, Mr. Davidson." Something about her directness intrigued him. Maybe it was rebellion against his father's expectations, or maybe it was those honest eyes. But Henry heard himself say, "The job is yours if you want it." Mary's eyes widened slightly, the first crack in her composed facade. "Just like that? Just like that. Can you start today?" She nodded, and Henry could have sworn he saw her hands trembling slightly as she gripped her worn purse. "Yes, sir. Thank you. First order of business, get yourself some proper office attire. Mrs. Peterson will give you a company credit card." "I can't accept," Mary began, but Henry cut her off. "It's not charity, it's a business expense. I can't have my assistant looking like she shops at thrift stores." The words came out harsher than he intended, and he saw something flash in Mary's eyes. Pride, perhaps, or defiance. But she simply nodded. What Henry didn't know was that his new assistant was carrying a secret that would shake the foundations of everything he thought he knew about wealth, privilege, and the true meaning of value. As Mary left his office that morning, neither of them could have predicted how their lives were about to change, all because of what she would discover on her very first day at Davidson Enterprises. Mary stood in front of the mirror in the executive washroom, hardly recognizing herself in the navy blue designer suit Mrs. Peterson had helped her select. Her hands smoothed down the silk blouse, something that would have cost 3 months' rent at her tiny apartment. The price tags had made her dizzy, but Mrs. Peterson had insisted this was standard for executive assistants at Davidson Enterprises. "First rule of business," the older woman had said, "dress for the position you want, not the one you have." Then, with a knowing look, she'd added, "Henry Davidson isn't like his father. He sees potential where others see privilege." Now, taking a deep breath, Mary gathered her courage and headed to her new desk outside Henry's office. The morning passed in a blur of training, computer systems, filing protocols, phone etiquette. Everything was state-of-the-art for 1985, from the IBM PC on her desk to the sophisticated phone system with multiple lines. It wasn't until after lunch that Mary made the discovery. She was organizing Henry's filing cabinet, trying to make sense of his chaotic system, when she found it. A small leather-bound ledger tucked behind a row of folders. It had fallen behind the drawer, and something about its worn cover suggested it wasn't meant to be found. Mary knew she should simply return it to Henry, but as she flipped it open, a yellowed newspaper clipping fell out. The headline made her blood run cold. Davidson family linked to missing funds in workers, pension scandal, 1965. The article detailed accusations against Henry's grandfather, Theodore Davidson III, regarding misappropriated pension funds. The case had been dismissed due to lack of evidence, but the reporter had noted that several key witnesses had suddenly withdrawn their testimonies. Below the article, in faded ink, someone had written, "The truth must stay buried. T.D." Mary's hands trembled as she read through the ledger's pages. Column after column of numbers, dates, and cryptic notations painted a disturbing picture. If she was interpreting this correctly, the pension fund scandal hadn't ended in 1965. It had just gone underground. A shadow fell across her desk. "Finding everything all right?" Henry's voice made her jump. She quickly closed the ledger, but not before he glimpsed it. The color drained from his face. "Where did you find that?" His voice was barely a whisper. "It was behind the files. I was just organizing." "Give it to me." His outstretched hand shook slightly. Mary hesitated. "Mr. Davidson, Henry, these numbers, they show things you don't understand." He cut her off. But there was something in his eyes, not anger, but fear. "Please, Mary, that ledger, it's complicated." She handed it over, watching as he clutched it like a lifeline. "Does your father know about this?" Henry's laugh was bitter. "My father, he's the one who—" He stopped abruptly, running a hand through his hair. "Forget you saw this. Please, for your own good." But Mary couldn't forget. Not when she recognized some of the names in that ledger. Names of people from her own neighborhood, former Davidson Enterprises workers who'd lost everything when their pensions vanished. People like her father. The rest of the afternoon passed in tense silence. Henry barely emerged from his office, and when he did, he wouldn't meet her eyes. Mary tried to focus on learning her new duties, but her mind kept returning to those pages of numbers and names. At 5 o'clock, Mrs. Peterson stopped by her desk. "First day's almost over, dear. How are you settling in?" Mary forced a smile. "Fine, thank you. It's quite different from what I expected." The older woman studied her face. "You know, I've been here since Henry was a boy. He used to visit his father's office, always asking questions about everything. Such a curious child." She paused, then added quietly, "Sometimes the answers we find aren't what we expect, but it's what we do with those answers that matters." After Mrs. Peterson left, Mary sat at her desk, staring at her reflection in the darkened computer screen. She'd taken this job hoping to support her mother and younger sisters, maybe even save enough to finish college. Instead, she'd stumbled into something that could destroy lives, including her own. A soft thud from Henry's office caught her attention. Through the partially open door, she saw him standing at his window, forehead pressed against the glass, the ledger clutched in his hands. For a moment, he looked less like the arrogant executive who'd hired her, and more like a lost boy carrying a burden too heavy for his shoulders. Mary thought about her father, who'd worked 30 years for Davidson Enterprises only to lose everything. She thought about her mother, still working 2 jobs to make ends meet. And she thought about the names in that ledger, hundreds of families whose lives had been altered by the secrets in those pages. As she gathered her things to leave, Mary made a decision. She might be just a poor girl playing dress-up in designer clothes, but she had something many people in this building seemed to lack, a conscience. Tomorrow, she would start digging deeper. But first, she needed to understand Henry Davidson better, because something in his reaction told her he might be as much a victim of these secrets as everyone else. What she didn't know was that someone else had been watching her discovery. In the shadows of the executive floor, another player in this drama had observed everything. someone who had their own plans for the secrets hidden in Davidson Enterprises' walls. The next morning dawned grey and humid, typical for a Chicago summer. Mary arrived early, determined to start her investigation, only to find Henry already in his office. He'd clearly been there for hours. His tie was loosened, coffee cups littered his desk, and papers were strewn everywhere. "You're early," he said without looking up. "So are you." Mary set a fresh coffee on his desk, carefully avoiding the scattered papers. Rough night. Henry finally met her eyes. The dark circles under his suggested he hadn't slept at all. "Listen, about yesterday, I need to explain something." Before he could continue, the office door burst open. Thomas Davidson Sr., Henry's father, strode in like he owned the place, which, Mary reminded herself, he technically did. He was tall, grey-haired, and carried himself with the kind of confidence that came from decades of power. "Henry, we need to—" He stopped short at seeing Mary. "Who's this?" "My new assistant. Father. Mary Phelps." Thomas's eyes narrowed slightly. "Phelps? Any relation to James Phelps?" Mary's heart skipped a beat. "James Phelps, her father's name." "Yes, sir, he worked in your manufacturing division for 30 years. "Ah, yes, unfortunate business, his retirement." Thomas's voice was carefully neutral. "Henry, a word, privately." Mary left the office, but not before catching Henry's expression, a mixture of defiance and something else. Fear, shame, she couldn't quite tell. Through the door, she could hear their voices rising. Though the words were muffled, the tension was clear. A few minutes later, Thomas stormed out, barely acknowledging Mary as he passed. Henry emerged shortly after, looking shaken. "Cancel my morning appointments," he said. "I need some air." "Of course. Should I—" "Come with me," he added, surprising them both. They took the elevator to the building's rooftop garden, a luxury space usually reserved for client meetings. Chicago's skyline stretched before them, the morning sun finally breaking through the clouds. "Your father," Henry began, leaning against the railing. "He was one of the pension cases, wasn't he?" Mary nodded. "The doctors said the stress of losing everything contributed to his heart attack last year." Henry closed his eyes, pain crossing his features. "I was 12 when I first suspected something was wrong. Found documents I shouldn't have, asked questions I shouldn't have asked. My father, he has a way of making things disappear. Problems, questions, people." The witnesses who withdrew their testimonies, Mary realized, among others. Henry turned to face her. "I've spent years trying to find proof, trying to understand the full scope of what happened. That ledger you found, there's just the tip of the iceberg. Why haven't you gone to the authorities?" "With what? Circumstantial evidence. My father's lawyers would bury it, and besides—" He hesitated. "It's complicated. The company employs thousands of people. If this got out, if Davidson Enterprises collapsed, more families would suffer," Mary finished. "Like mine did." "Exactly." Henry ran a hand through his hair, a gesture Mary was beginning to recognize as a sign of frustration. "But maybe with your help, we could find a way to make things right. Not just expose the truth, but fix it." Mary studied him carefully. "Why trust me? You barely know me." "Because you're the first person who's looked at me and seen me, not just the Davidson name. And because—" He smiled slightly. "Who told me my tie was crooked?" Despite herself, Mary felt a smile tugging at her lips. "It's crooked again, by the way." Their eyes met, and for a moment something passed between them, understanding, perhaps, or the beginning of trust. But the moment was broken by the sound of the rooftop door opening. Mrs. Peterson hurried toward them. "Henry, your father's called an emergency board meeting. He's announcing some sort of corporate restructuring." Henry's face paled. "He's making his move already. Mary, I need you to do something for me. In my office, there's a safe behind the Picasso print. The combination is my mother's birthday. 055542. Inside, you'll find—" "Henry!" Thomas's voice boomed across the rooftop. He stood in the doorway, flanked by 2 security guards. "Step away from her. Miss Phelps, you're terminated, effective immediately. Security will escort you out." "Father, you can't." "I can and I will." Thomas's voice was steel. "This is still my company, and I will not have James Phelps's daughter anywhere near our family's business." As the guards approached, Mary straightened her spine. She might be leaving, but she'd seen enough to know this wasn't over. Henry tried to intervene, but his father held him back, whispering something in his ear that made him go still. In the elevator, surrounded by guards, Mary thought about everything she'd learned. The ledger, Henry's confession, Thomas's reaction to her presence. Somewhere in that building was evidence that could bring justice to hundreds of families, including her own. What she didn't know was that in firing her, Thomas Davidson had made a crucial mistake, because Mary Phelps had inherited more than just her father's name. She'd inherited his determination, his integrity, and most importantly, his old union contacts. Contacts who might be very interested in what she had to say about Davidson Enterprises. And in his office, Henry Davidson was already planning how to get her back, not just as his assistant, but as his partner in exposing a truth that had destroyed too many lives for too long. The game wasn't over. It was just beginning. The phone in Mary's small apartment rang at exactly midnight. She'd been sitting in the dark, unable to sleep, replaying the day's events in her mind. On the 3rd ring, she answered, "Don't say anything." Henry's voice was barely a whisper. "Meet me at Lou Mitchell's restaurant in an hour. Come alone." The line went dead. Lou Mitchell's was a Chicago institution, famous for its breakfast and infamous for its late-night crowd of journalists and city workers. At this hour, it was nearly empty. Mary found Henry in a back booth, wearing casual clothes instead of his usual suit. He looked different, more approachable, but also more anxious. "I'm sorry about today," he said, as she slid into the booth. "My father, he's dangerous when he feels threatened." "I gathered that," Mary replied, thinking of the security guards, firm grip on her arms. "Why am I here, Henry?" A waitress approached, and Henry waited until she'd taken their order and moved away before continuing. "Because I need your help and because—" He glanced around before lowering his voice. "I think someone's been following me since this afternoon." Mary felt a chill despite the warm diner air. "Your father?" "Maybe. Or someone working for him. But that's not the important part." He pulled an envelope from his jacket. "I managed to get into the safe before they changed the locks. Found this." Inside the envelope was a single photograph, yellowed with age. It showed a group of men standing in front of Davidson Enterprises' old factory. Mary recognized her father immediately, younger, stronger, standing proud in his union representative badge. Beside him was Theodore Davidson, Henry's grandfather, and several other men she didn't recognize. "Turn it over," Henry said. On the back was written, "The last meeting, T, D, J, P, and witnesses, May 15th, 1965. "That was the day before the pension fund disappeared," Mary whispered. "My father never talked about that meeting." "Because he was protecting someone." Henry leaned forward. "Mary, I think your father wasn't just a victim. I think he knew something. Something big enough that my grandfather paid a lot of money to keep quiet." A memory stirred in Mary's mind. "The lockbox." "What?" "My father had a safety deposit box at First Chicago Bank. After he died, my mother tried to access it, but there was some problem with the paperwork. It's still there, untouched." Henry's eyes lit up. "We need to get into that box. It's not that simple. We'd need my mother's permission, and after what happened with the pension—" "She hates my family," Henry finished. "Can't say I blame her." Their food arrived, and they ate in thoughtful silence. Mary watched Henry attack his Denver omelette with the enthusiasm of someone who rarely ate in diners. There was something endearing about seeing him here, away from the corporate armor of Davidson Enterprises. "Why are you really doing this?" she finally asked. "You could just walk away, start fresh somewhere else. Why risk everything?" Henry set down his fork, his expression serious. "Because when I was 16, I found my grandfather in his study, drinking himself into oblivion. He looked at me and said, 'I sold my soul for this empire, and your father's selling his to keep it. I didn't understand then. I do now." He paused. "I don't want that to be my legacy." Before Mary could respond, the diner's door chimed. A man in a dark suit entered, scanning the room. Henry tensed. "Back door," he whispered. "Now." They slipped out through the kitchen, leaving cash on the table. The humid night air hit them as they emerged in the alley behind the restaurant. Henry grabbed Mary's hand, pulling her along as they ran through the maze of downtown Chicago's back streets. Finally, breathless, they stopped in a doorway. Mary was acutely aware of Henry's hand still holding hers, of how close they were standing in the narrow space. "I should get home," she said, reluctantly pulling away. "My mother will worry." "Mary," Henry's voice was soft. "Whatever's in that safety deposit box, whatever my father's trying to hide, it's dangerous. You don't have to be part of this." She thought of her father, of all the other families who'd lost everything. "Yes, I do. But we do this smart. No more running through alleys in the middle of the night." A ghost of a smile crossed Henry's face. "Agreed. Though I have to admit, this is the most fun I've had in years. You need to get out more." "Maybe I do." He hesitated. "Be careful going home. And Mary, thank you for believing in me." She caught a cab a block away, her mind racing. As the city lights blurred past her window, Mary thought about the photograph, about her father's untouched safety deposit box, about Henry's soft voice in the doorway. She was playing a dangerous game, but something told her it was worth the risk. What she didn't know was that the man in the dark suit hadn't been following Henry. He'd been following her, and in his report to Thomas Davidson, he included every detail of their midnight meeting, every word of their conversation, and most importantly, the mention of James Phelps's safety deposit box. The next morning would bring new challenges, new dangers, and new revelations that would test not only Mary and Henry's growing trust in each other, but also their understanding of just how deep the Davidson family's secrets went. The next morning brought rain and unwelcome surprises. Mary arrived at her mother's small house for their weekly breakfast to find the front door slightly ajar. Her heart pounding, she pushed it open. "Mom!" The house was a mess. Drawers pulled out, papers scattered everywhere. Her mother sat at the kitchen table, clutching a cup of coffee with trembling hands. Mrs. Peterson, of all people, sat beside her. "They were looking for your father's papers," her mother said without preamble. "Two men. They said they were from the bank." Mrs. Peterson stood, her normally perfect posture rigid with tension. "I came to warn you, but I was too late. They'd already been here." Mary sank into a chair. "How did you know?" "Because I've worked at Davidson Enterprises for 30 years, dear. I know how Thomas Davidson operates." She glanced at her watch. "Henry's waiting at the coffee shop around the corner. You need to go, now." The coffee shop was nearly empty when Mary arrived. Henry sat in the farthest corner, a newspaper spread before him. He looked up as she approached, his face tight with concern. "They went after your mother's house." "How did you know?" "Because my father's been in his office since 5 a.m. making calls. Mary, we need to move fast. Whatever's in that safety deposit box, he's desperate to find it." "Then we get to it first." Mary's voice was steel. "So my mother still has the key. They didn't find it." Henry's eyes widened. "Where?" "Where no one would think to look. In my father's old toolbox. He always said the best place to hide something valuable is somewhere worthless." They made plans quickly. The bank opened at 9 a.m. Mary would go with her mother to access the box while Henry created a distraction at Davidson Enterprises to keep his father occupied. "Be careful," Henry said as they parted. His hand caught hers briefly, and that simple touch sent warmth through her despite the morning chill. At exactly 9 a.m., Mary and her mother walked into First Chicago Bank. The process was agonizingly slow. Forms to fill out, ID to verify, ancient signatures to compare. Finally, they were led to the vault. The safety deposit box was smaller than Mary expected. Her mother's hands shook as she inserted the key. Inside was a single envelope and a small notebook. Mary recognized her father's handwriting immediately. The envelope contained more photographs, Theodore Davidson with various men in suits, some marked with X's. The notebook was filled with dates, names, And numbers. He was gathering evidence, Mary whispered. All those years. Your father was a good man, her mother said softly. He believed in justice, even when it cost him everything. A throat cleared behind them. They turned to find Thomas Davidson standing in the vault doorway, two men in suits flanking him. Mrs. Phelps, he said smoothly. How nice to see you again. I believe you have something that belongs to me. Nothing here belongs to you, Mary's mother replied, her voice steady despite her pale face. I beg to differ. He stepped forward. James Phelps was paid very well for his silence. That agreement extends beyond the grave. You're wrong. Mary clutched the notebook tighter. My father wasn't bought. He was building a case against you. Thomas laughed, but there was no humor in it. Is that what you think? Your father was many things, Miss Phelps, but a hero wasn't one of them. Show her, Roberts. One of the suited men handed Mary another envelope. Inside was a check, dated 1965, made out to James Phelps for an enormous sum, and beside it, a letter in her father's handwriting, agreeing to silence in exchange for financial security for his family. Mary felt the world tilt. No. Yes, Thomas said. Everyone has their price, Miss Phelps. Your father's was his family's future. Now hand over the notebook. Don't. Henry's voice cut through the vault. He stood behind his father, slightly out of breath, as if he'd been running. This doesn't concern you, son, Thomas said without turning. Everything about this concerns me. Henry moved to stand beside Mary. I know about the pension fund, father, about grandfather's scheme, about the witnesses who disappeared, and I know why you're really here. Thomas finally turned to face his son. Do you really understand what's at stake? I understand that this ends now. Henry's voice was quiet but firm. One way or another, the truth comes out today. The tension in the vault was electric. Mary looked between father and son, seeing the same determined set of their jaws, the same fire in their eyes. But where Thomas's gaze held calculation, Henry's held something else, hope, perhaps, or the chance for redemption. What happened next would change everything, not just for the Davidson family, but for Mary and everyone else caught in the web of decades-old secrets and lies. Because sometimes the truth isn't what we expect, and redemption comes from the most unexpected places. The bank vault seemed to grow smaller as Thomas Davidson stared at his son, his face a mask of controlled anger. I don't know what you're doing, Henry. Actually, father, for the first time, I do. Henry moved closer to Mary, his shoulder brushing hers. I've seen the real ledger. Thomas's composure cracked slightly. What ledger? The one grandfather kept in his real safe, the one that shows where the pension money really went. Henry's voice was steady. It wasn't stolen, it was invested. In secret. For them. Mary's mother gasped softly. Thomas Davidson's face had gone pale. Your grandfather, Thomas said slowly, was many things, but he wasn't a thief. He was trying to protect everyone. Then tell them, Henry urged. Tell them the truth. Thomas looked around the vault, at the faces watching him, his son, Mary, her mother, even his own security men. For the first time, he looked old, tired. The pension fund, he began, then stopped, collecting himself. The company was in trouble, real trouble, the kind that would have meant closing the factories, laying off thousands. Your grandfather had a choice: use the pension fund to keep the company afloat, or watch everything collapse. But that's not what he did, is it? Henry pressed. No. Thomas sank onto a nearby chair. He took the money, yes, but he didn't steal it. He invested it in new technologies, in foreign markets, risky ventures that the board would never have approved. If it had failed, he would have lost everything, but it didn't fail. Mary's mind raced. The company's expansion in the 70s was built on those investments, Thomas confirmed. The pension fund money multiplied tenfold. Every penny was paid back with interest. But we couldn't tell anyone. The original action was still illegal. If it had come out, the company would have been destroyed anyway, Henry finished. So you created a cover-up to hide the truth. And my father. Mary's voice shook slightly. What was his role? Thomas looked at her mother. James knew. He discovered the investment scheme. But instead of exposing it, he understood what Theodore was trying to do. He agreed to help manage the repayment, secretly returning the money through various channels. The check, Mary realized, it wasn't hush money. It was him taking his cut of the returns. "Your father," Thomas said quietly, "was one of the most honorable men I've ever known. He agreed to help on one condition, that every family got back more than they lost. The check you saw was his commission for managing the repayments, money he used to help other workers who were struggling." Mary's mother was crying softly. "He never told me. All those years carrying that secret. It would have ruined everything," Thomas said. "The SEC, the unions, they wouldn't have cared that the money was paid back. The original act was still illegal. Thousands would have lost their jobs." But the notebook, Mary held up her father's records, he was still gathering evidence. Insurance, Henry realized. In case someone didn't keep their end of the deal. In case the money wasn't paid back as promised. Thomas stood slowly. "Now you understand why this has to stay buried. The truth would destroy too many lives." A heavy silence fell over the vault. Mary looked at the notebook in her hands, then at Henry. His eyes met hers, and in them she saw the same conflict she felt, the weight of truth against the cost of exposing it. "There's another way," Henry said finally. "A way to make it right without destroying everything." Thomas looked at his son warily. "What are you suggesting?" "The truth doesn't have to come out publicly, but we can use the money, the profits from those investments, to do real good. To help the families who suffered during the cover-up, to create a foundation. A way to make amends without admitting guilt," Mary added, understanding. "My father would have wanted that." The tension in Thomas's shoulders eased slightly. It would take time, planning, discretion. "Then we do it right," Henry said. "Together." Mary felt Henry's hand find hers, squeezing gently. In that moment, something shifted, not just between them, but in the very air of the vault. A decades-old burden began to lift. But as they left the bank that morning, none of them noticed the figure watching from across the street, someone who had followed them, who had heard everything, and who had very different plans for the truth they'd just uncovered. The story wasn't over yet. In fact, the most dangerous part was just beginning. 2 weeks after the confrontation in the bank vault, Mary sat at her restored desk at Davidson Enterprises. She'd been officially rehired, this time with a new title, Director of Community Relations. The position had been Henry's idea, giving her oversight of the newly created Davidson Foundation. The morning newspaper sat on her desk, unopened. She already knew what the headline would say, something about Davidson Enterprises' surprising new charitable initiative, dedicating millions to worker support programs and community development. The press release had gone out yesterday, carefully worded to protect old secrets while promising new beginnings. Mrs. Peterson appeared at her door. "He's waiting for you in the conference room." Mary found Henry standing at the window, watching the Chicago sunrise paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. He turned as she entered, and something in his expression made her heart skip. "The first checks go out today," he said. 20 families, all former employees who struggled after the pension fund incident. "My mother received hers yesterday." Mary smiled. She cried. "Said Dad would be proud." "He would be." Henry moved closer. "We're doing the right thing, Mary, finally." But something in his tone made her pause. "What's wrong?" "Roberts resigned this morning." Henry ran a hand through his hair, that familiar gesture of frustration. "Father's head of security. He's threatening to go to the press." "What does he want?" "Money, of course, but more than that. Revenge. Apparently, Grandfather forced his father out of the company back in '65. Another secret we never knew about. Mary processed this. So he followed us to the bank that day. Heard everything. Yes, Father's handling it, but..." Henry's voice trailed off. "But you're worried." "Not about Roberts. He'll take the money and disappear." Henry turned to face her fully. "I'm worried about us." Mary's breath caught. "Us?" "These past weeks, working together, planning the foundation, I've never felt more alive, more purposeful." He stepped closer. "And it's because of you, Mary. You make me want to be better, to do better." Henry, I know there are complications. My family's history with yours, the class differences everyone keeps whispering about. He took her hand. But I don't care about any of that. I care about you. The morning sun streamed through the windows, warming Mary's face as she looked up at him. In his eyes, she saw not the privileged heir who'd hired her on a whim, but the man who'd run through back alleys with her, who'd stood beside her in a bank vault, who'd chosen truth over comfort. "Dance with me?" he said suddenly. "What? Here. Now? There's no music." Henry smiled and walked to the conference room's vintage radio, turning it on. The soft notes of Cyndi Lauper's Time After Time filled the room, one of those perfect 80s moments that seemed meant just for them. As they swayed together, Mary thought about everything that had brought them to this moment. The mysteries, the dangers, the revelations. But mostly, she thought about how right it felt to be here, in his arms. "You know," she said softly, "when I first started working here, I thought I had you figured out. The spoiled heir playing at business. And now I know better. You're so much more than your name, Henry Davidson." He pulled back slightly to look at her, his eyes intense. "And you, Mary Phelps, are the most remarkable person I've ever met." The music played softly as the morning sun painted Chicago's skyline. In that moment, all the complications fell away. Family histories, class differences, old secrets and new beginnings. There was just them, standing together in the light of a new day. When Henry finally kissed her, it was gentle and sweet, carrying the promise of more tomorrows, a kiss that spoke of trust earned and bridges built, of wrongs made right and futures yet to be written. Later that afternoon, Thomas Davidson walked past the conference room to find them still there, heads bent together over foundation paperwork, occasionally stealing glances at each other when they thought no one was looking. He smiled slightly, thinking of another young couple, decades ago, himself and Henry's mother, falling in love over business proposals and coffee. The Davidson empire had been built on secrets, some dark and some necessary, but its future would be built on something else: truth, justice, and most importantly, love. Because sometimes the greatest inheritances aren't the ones written in ledgers or locked in vaults, but the ones written in hearts and proven through actions. As the sun set over Chicago that evening, Mary and Henry stood together on the rooftop garden where they'd first begun to trust each other. The city stretched before them, full of possibilities. "Ready to change the world?" Henry asked, squeezing her hand. Mary smiled. "One family at a time." And in that moment, both of them knew that while their story had begun with secrets and suspicion, it would continue with hope and purpose, and most importantly, with love. Thank you for watching today's story. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to give it a big thumbs up, share it with your friends, and subscribe to the channel to relive the magic of the 80s every day with our heartfelt stories. May God bless you and your family. And don't forget to click on the video popping up on the screen right now. It's another totally rad story you won't want to miss. See you in the next video, and stay awesome.